Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Advancing Women in Tech Perspective episode that brings real world experience to people who are looking to advance their careers in product management. I'm here today with two other seasoned product managers to talk about how we can validate minimum viable product with our customers. My name is Anjali Munjal, and I'm a product manager at Dell Technologies, looking after the proven technologies of the data protection portfolio, and volunteer as the head of Boston chapter for AVIT. Along with me are Lauren Creedon and Shruti Gupta. Lauren is a group product manager for artificial intelligence products at Drift. She mentors aspiring women product leaders in her volunteer work with 81 Cents and with AVIT. She's passionate about helping women advance in highly technical fields like artificial intelligence, even if they don't have any advanced technical degrees. Alongside, we have Shruti, who is a product manager at Dell Tech responsible for data protection strategy for the enterprise storage. She also leads the Dell's employee resource groups and volunteers with AVIT for our Boston chapter. In today's session, we'll be talking about the MVP. One of the critical roles of a product manager is not only to help define the MVP of the product, but also ensure that it is validated with customers for the continued growth and success of the products. So let's start with saying that you have a new feature idea. How do you evaluate customer interest for your idea? Shruti, given your experience with the storage product, how do you validate the ideas in your field?
Thanks, Anjali, for the question. So before I'm thinking about the product, features, users, or MVP, go to, do a competitive analysis. And this is very important because your competitor may have done half the work for you, like assessing the market for this product or what user wants or doesn't want. Then analyze your data against the competitor's product and don't get discouraged. You have the opportunity to refine the product better than the competitor. Analyze how your product or the feature provides a unique value to the user. Is it affordable? Does it provide value for money to the user? Identify a competitive advantage. And remember, competition is healthy. The next step is to identify who are the potential users for the product, build your persona, and why they will purchase this product or use this feature. For example, if you're building an app for hiking, apart from professional hikers, think about who else will be using your app. It could be family with young kids, a group of friends, elderly, etc. Then assess if your idea meets the needs of these personas. List what is the unique value you're providing to them. Then the second step is to identify the sample of users who are willing to test the product or the new feature while it's in its beta and provide a candid feedback. Then create a demo product and see the response. And that is your MVP. In the MVP, you only develop the core functionalities to solve a specific problem and satisfy early adopters. It's a basic model of the product. And MVP is a build, measure, and learn process. So it allows you to improve your product as you validate your assumptions and adapt based on empirical data and anecdotal user feedback. Another option for entrepreneurs is to pre-sell the products on the crowdfunding websites like Kickstarter. It allows you to test whether the concept sells before even investing in building it.
So that's great point, Shruti. You know the target personas, finding ways to evaluate customer interest and refine it towards the customer needs. And really, it's like as you mentioned, build, measure, and learn, and it's a continuous process. So now that we have gauged a customer interest and we've decided to move forward, how do you define the MVP of your product? Lauren, in your B2B SaaS journey, what do you think actually constitutes the MVP?
Thank you, Anjali. So, what constitutes the MVP really? It's a vehicle you use to learn in stages where you're wrong as fast as you can in order of highest risk first. I've worked in two high growth B2B software and hardware companies, and at both we've used variations of a beta program or early access cohort to test with real users before a new product release or full user-based feature release. So I structure my MVP in 3 stages that I reference as the 1-5-50 model. Let's start with 1. One customer is the POC level. This is where you learn about that highest risk. Do you have the right solution path? You're usually working with engineering at this stage to reduce the feasibility risk early on, test out multiple solutions in a super raw environment, a lot of manual steps to see if that POC works in the field. And that can apply to both software and hardware. Using duct tape with your hardware solution, using really simple test and learn process with software. The goal, reduce costs up front to learn where you want to continue to invest. So then you move to the 5 stage. Pick 5 trusted customers you've identified as early adopters, but have enough variables across user roles and environments to test your assumptions. This stage is about learning, do you have the right solution and can users use it? So it's still early enough to pivot on the solution path based on what you learn from those variables. And you continue to test the feasibility risk, reduce that risk, while also using some manual wireframes or prototypes with 5 customers to uncover the friction points on usability, inform the direction of your front-end investment. Ideally, you find those top 1 to 2 problems to solve to get the user and the business to their goal. And then you can repeat that loop as many times as you need to really find where you're wrong before you invest in the bet for the first 50 customers. With that first 50, you try to learn how to de-risk launch to improve adoption. And these 50 should get what you expect to take to market, still willing to be wrong, but test whether your leading indicators are on track, are users adopting and engaging, and to get that successful rollout. Again, learning where you're wrong and where to improve.
That's very interesting concept, Lauren. Using the 1, 5, and 50 model. I personally gained a lot of insight from that, and using the wireframes as you mentioned. Go iterative and see towards the definition of your MVP. So great, we have an idea. We define the MVP. So the next stage is the launch. But before talking about the actual launching process, how do we know as a product manager is that the MVP that we defined is ready to be launched?
Well, good question. We do a lot of measurement, right? And we frame a lot of hypotheses as product managers. So the key is framing a clear hypothesis of the metric you need to hit at launch and design that MVP to test and learn across both the product execution and the go-to-market strategy. I designed my release to this group of 50 to include as few hand-holding steps as possible to simulate the real adoption you'll see when users interact with your product independently, and at what cost to your support teams of that. Again, applies to both software and hardware. If you're releasing a new software feature, or if you're shipping a box to a customer with a piece of hardware in it, try to give customers early access without direct access to your team. Test what engagement you get, what types of support interactions you get. So much of a product launch can be impacted by how a product is taken to market, how those value props are delivered, and how the user gets onboarded to the product. So I like to measure 3 things during an MVP to know whether you're ready to launch. The first is product adoption metrics. The second is the engagement impact of different marketing or onboarding tactics. And the third is a metric that corresponds to the support costs you can incur for releasing that product. So for that first, product adoption, I pick a metric that should be a leading indicator of the ultimate business metric you want to drive. It could be feature adoption. So you could assume that for a 1-month beta of a software feature, you want to see 70% of users adopt 3 or more times to show that they have that feature retention. And if they do, you're good to go. Now, if they don't, you learned something. It doesn't mean you have to reinvest. It just means you should investigate sentiment with those users and see if there's anything you could change with the users that didn't adopt, and ultimately decide whether or not you want to continue to invest in higher adoption. The second one for go-to-market tactics, again, like how they affected ultimately the impact on engagement. It's a great opportunity for an A/B test to see whether either cohort that received a particular tactic engaged in the product at a higher rate based on the physical or digital experience they received. Did one of the group need more handholding from conversations with your frontline teams, et cetera? So even using go-to-market experiments to help you find correlation and then replicate those factors for customer success at launch. And finally, use your support interactions to learn. Is there anything you can change in your onboarding materials or product that will help reduce those top interactions? Overall, based on what you measure and the decisions you make based on what you learn in those measurements, you can then set your roadmap to launch.
Thanks, Lauren. I think the points that you mentioned resonate, very well with what we even try to do on our side. Look for production adoption trends, engagement model impacts, and yes, the support cost. We need to ensure that the products are sustainable and scalable for the population. And as you say, go by the metrics, like 70% of the customers see how they are, reaction to it. So all that helps ensure driving towards our success. And I think it's very important that in addition to not only just for the V1, but also looking beyond to, more versions like V2, V3, it's very imperative. So we heard how we can validate the MVP. We have the go-to-market strategic alignment. So here we are ready for the launch. So what steps would you suggest, Shruti, are required to ensure the successful launch of your MVP?
Thanks, Anjali, for the question. So let's categorize it in three phases. So first is the pre-launch, then launch, and then post-launch. So for pre-launch, by this time, you would have the specific goal in your mind. And like, for example, are you focusing on the market penetration, or if your goal is to focus on retention of existing users? So once you have a defined goal, create key metrics that support your goal. That will help you to measure the success of your goal. The metrics could be how many users you're acquiring on a daily basis, weekly, or monthly basis. What are the user ratings or repeat customers you're getting? How many referrals are you getting, etc. For the pre-launch, think about which inbound or outbound marketing activities will you use to reach your target users. Then will you be doing any co-branding, any co-sales? Also, you can create a persuasive marketing message and test its effectiveness with the beta users. An active engagement with early product users can transform them into influencers and get a good word of mouth and good product vibe before the launch. Always have a contingency plan and resources on the standby for launch day surprises. Remember Murphy's Law. Then comes the launch phase. For launch, there has to be a very thorough planning for the launch activities, like which distribution channels you're going to use. Is it your website or retail stores or distributors? What is your pricing strategy? Are you going to go offensive or defensive here? I would also want to mention that there is no such thing as a perfect launch. What's crucial is to provide your customers with ample opportunities to report the feedback by the way of surveys, focus groups, usability tests, or customer advisory boards. Then it's your post-launch. Now that you have launched your product, you want to leverage the success matrix that you have defined to learn the success or failures of the launch process. Then determine what are the next steps based on those metrics and learn from them and adapt.
So true, Shruti, right? The effectiveness of the three phases of the launch, that you mentioned about the pre, the main, and the post. And yes, I think let's not forget about that. We do need to have the MVP in place for the launch. And also, right, as you said, that it's important to get, the feedback from the customer and then, rolling it into the towards the product success. So we all know the MVP equates to V1 of the product, but in order to the continued success and releasing the V2 version and so forth, what steps would one should take to evaluate the success and incorporate customer feedbacks towards, say, shaping the products for the future offering? So let's start with Lauren, and then we'll come to you, Shruti, for your thoughts.
So if you're like me, there's likely a couple different versions of what your product could be in the future that differ across your company, across your customers in terms of where to go with that product vision. So as the product manager, it's on you to not only have an opinion on this, but back it up with data. It's often quoted, you don't have to be right as the product manager, you have to get it right. I think that's Steve Jobs. Anyway, in order to get it right, though, you have to build in early opportunities to be wrong. So that applies to the MVP, like we've been talking about, but also learning about that version 2 and 3. So after the launch of version 1, there's a lot more opportunities to learn based on how the market reacts to the first version you ship. You can use these reactions to understand how those proposed evolutions of your product will align with the company's business goals. Every product iteration, remember, is an investment, and good product leaders understand the ROI behind their product investments. So before I even get into what that looks like to prove that out, I'll just reset on the 4 main value drivers that product iterations tend to need to drive. First, there's new customer acquisition. You can take a product to market and then learn that there's a problem you can solve that expands the serviceable portion of that addressable market to help more new customers buy. 2, you could learn about retention. So there are problems you could solve that increase the engagement and reduce churn with those customers you did acquire. Third is expansion, solving problems that increase the average amount people spend, the average contract value on your product. These are like upsell opportunities. And 4, cost cutting. You could solve problems that reduce the overall cost to deliver that value. So once you understand what your version 2 or 3 is going to drive for the company and the problem that it's going to solve for the customer to drive that value, you build an investment case based on a hypothesis of what problem you can solve and the amount you're willing to invest to solve that problem based on that relative impact it can drive. Use data from customer and user research to back this up, and frame experiments after the launch of V1 to prove or disprove whether those increments of user value will ultimately lead back to business value and prove out that hypothesis. And before you even take the 1-5-50 approach for that product investment, I'd encourage you to do 2 things without product investment first. The first is monitoring sales feedback and support interactions. Problems always bubble up through these channels, and they're often directly tied to either closed lost revenue or upsell opportunities that help you build that business case, or churned customers too. The second is framing hypotheses and testing with wireframe prototypes in user interviews. So really minimal concepts to get qualitative feedback if you're directionally correct, and then further invest in usability tests with just really small investment wireframes to understand the value that users ascribe to solving various problems. Once both sales feedback and user interviews tell you you're on track, then you can reinvest in that 1-5-50 model for new releases. So to conclude, I'll share a quick example to tie it all together from a past product I worked on. At one of my former companies, I led a team that built smart cameras and video software. And when we launched version 1 of the camera, they didn't yet have functionality that allowed for live streaming over the cloud to cloud sites like YouTube. We learned from sales feedback when we first launched a V1 of these cameras that we could increase the percent of closed-won deals by either lowering our price point or adding this cloud live streaming functionality to the cameras. So we built a business case using the number of opportunities we could win by investing in solving that live streaming problem instead of lowering prices. We then invested in the 1-5-50 model using prototypes to test the feasibility risk of different network environments, different cloud streaming sites, learning which destinations were not only the most feasible, but also the most desirable for users to stream to and their audiences to watch on. Ultimately rolling out the feature to a group of 50 users to test whether our go-to-market strategy drove adoption and feature retention at low support costs. So that was V2 using that same 1-5-50 model. And I just wanted to conclude by saying I learned a lot of this process by just going through that process on the initiatives. It sounds like I know what I'm talking about, but I learned by doing, and you can too.
Good points, Lauren. So effective road mapping of future product releases requires both incremental improvement mindset as well as keeping the future vision. Think of it as a funnel. What you want in the next version comes out of a funnel. So, but there has to be some key inputs like what customers want. Use the analytics to understand what customers really want. Leverage the responses from customer interviews, surveys, focus groups. Then second input is what makes sense for the business. It should align with your company and product's mission and the vision. Then third is what competition is doing. As I said earlier, competition is healthy. Leverage them to your advantage, learn from them, and adapt. And the fourth is any feedback that you have received from the customer in the existing product. And the key is to be brutal and unemotional about the decisions. For example, if you get the feedback that does not match your expectations, that doesn't mean that you have failed, but that means you succeeded in understanding what does not fit right. Remember Thomas Edison. So, if you do a thorough analysis of these inputs, what comes out of a funnel would define your roadmap. And once you have that, work with engineering to build the best product you can ever make.
Great points, Lauren and Shruti. As we just to summarize, you mentioned is, keep an eye for an ROI and not only retain your buyer base, but finding continuous ways to expand this, such as having the sales feedback, support interactions, creating and testing hypotheses, and obviously not forgetting that it's an iterative loop. And Shruti, you kind of mentioned there, it's really very well resonated. Disconnect from any emotions. Be very data driven. Go with what the customer wants, what makes sense for the business, and the feedback to drive the continuous success of your products. With this, we conclude today's session. Thank you everyone for listening to the real world examples from the product managers in the technical industry. I hope you've gained, great insights into what it means not only to define what the MVP of the product is, but also what it means to validate it. So this was just a glimpse into the product management world. You can find more details and information on Coursera. Thank you and have a nice day.